Chapter 289. In the cellar, the black-haired girl who heard the call snapped out of her daze. She realized that Luoya had appeared beside her without her noticing. At this moment, Luoya was covered in dust. His coat was still stained with blood and dust after the battle. However, unlike his clothes, the black-haired young man had a firm and powerful expression. His golden pupils shone in the dark cellar, gentle and calm. When she met his gaze, Lillian seemed to have forgotten about the bloody hell she was in. She forgot about the indescribable pain and unhappiness she felt. An inexplicable sense of intimacy shone in her heart like a beam of light, snapping her out of her daze. However, it was also because of this that Lillian suddenly felt an unbearable sense of shame. As an elder who had always been worried about Luoya, she didn't want to show it. She had an inexplicable feeling of not wanting the young man to see her unrecognizable self. "Don't look at me. Get out." Her hoarse voice issued a strict order. This was the first time Lillian had spoken to Luoya in such a tone since they met. Her words were strong on the outside but weak on the inside, implying that she was imploring him. Unfortunately, Luoya couldn't comply. "I'm sorry, senior sister. We're of the same rank. You can't order me around. You. Let go. Let go of me." Looking at the girl who kept struggling to retract her arm while crying with her head lowered, Luoya's face twitched. He was filled with regret. He didn't expect that senior sister's condition would be so serious. She probably saw an illusion when she tried to touch the corpse earlier. Thinking of this, the young man steeled his resolve. He thought for a moment and reported the news to the panicking girl. "Senior sister, Miss Murdy is safe. The blood sacrifice church's bishop died after he was defeated by me while escaping." The black-haired young man softly reported the situation on his side. The sudden news successfully diverted part of Lillian's attention, causing the girl to stop struggling. Seeing this, Luoya continued. "The matters outside are almost done. I'll report to the academy tomorrow morning. This incident will be considered over. Senior sister, can you not stay here any longer? Everyone outside is worried about you." Under Luoya's soft persuasion, Lillian's expression finally softened. However, the corpse of her friend beside her seemed to blame her silently. The young lady turned her head and was about to look again when Luoya stepped forward and blocked her view. Luoya felt like a nightmare to see someone she once knew turn into a badly mutilated corpse. The scariest part was that Lillian was also the head of the security department. This could be said to be the biggest knot in Luoya's heart. But after careful consideration, Luoya came up with a countermeasure. "Luoya, senior sister, don't look anymore. Don't tell me you think it's your fault." Chapter 290. The moment the bloodline resonance appeared, both Lillian and Luoya's minds went blank. Neither of them expected such a thing to happen. But the next moment, that feeling of perfect harmony instantly occupied their hearts. Before their subjective thoughts were reflected, the bloodline resonance was already using its own method to promote their choice. If a person's happiness and sadness were affected to a certain extent by hormones, then the bloodline's influence was an indescribable yet irresistible sense of intimacy. Although this surging resonance was only for a short moment, it completely changed Luoya and Lillian's understanding of each other and also solved many mysteries in Lillian's heart. "So that's how it is." The purple-eyed girl widened her eyes. She finally understood why she had been acting so strange recently. No matter if it was the natural concern or the uncontrollable pity, it wasn't without reason. The power of being a blood relative had already unknowingly influenced Lillian. Although there was no resonance, every time her and Luoya's spell powers clashed and overlapped, subtle changes would occur. Actually, now that she thought about it, many things were already quite obvious. They were both of the same creation element and the same spell powers. With all these coincidences overlapping, the only explanation was that they weren't coincidences. However, the huge difference in her living environment made Lillian ignore all of this. And when the truth arrived, it brought her a huge surprise. If one were to trace the origins of the Ackerman family and the Akkad family, it had been at least 1,000 years since they met. Lillian viewed this bloodline relationship that spanned countless years as a treasure that Shia had bestowed upon her. A bloodline family. A relationship that she couldn't betray, couldn't hate, and absolutely couldn't be severed. These words spread in Lillian's heart like a hot current. At the same time, Luo Ya's mind was in chaos. Lillian was his bloodline relative? How was this possible? Disregarding everything else, if this relationship was discovered, Lillian's situation would be, Luo Ya, we are, senior sister. The black-haired boy looked at the girl who was so agitated that she couldn't speak. He was about to speak when he suddenly felt an uncontrollable spell power rapidly erupting in his body. At the same time, Luo Ya's black rose ring glowed as if it was resonating with the spell power. Not good. Senior sister, get away from me. Luo Ya, who had already experienced this situation twice, instantly paled and pushed the girl away. Under Lillian's astonished gaze, the torrent of cursed power erupted with an unstoppable force. Before he could speak, Luo Ya's vision turned black, and he lost consciousness. When the black-haired young man opened his eyes again, he was greeted by a starless night sky. Chapter 291. Saint Heroes Society. Saint Envoy? On the side of the road, Luo Ya stared at the first line of the letter with the help of the firelight. His golden pupils constricted in disbelief, and he suddenly turned around to look at the pile of corpses behind him. They're from the Saint Heroes Society? The Saint Heroes Society is undoubtedly a cult, but the cultists are also cultists. So, it seems like this is a double cross? The black-haired boy blinked. He did not expect to find a group of dead enemies. The Saint Heroes Society. This name was deeply etched in Luo Ya's memory. During the Civil War of the Golden Fleet, Luo Ya had a close relationship with the director of the Saint Heroes Society, Daoj Leisai. He even chased after him and made the young level 2 source puppet master break down. Of course, because Daoj Leisai almost succeeded in killing Xia Luot, Luo Ya was still angry even if he was turned into thousands of pieces of frozen meat. After returning, Luo Ya also asked about the situation of the Nuwa Ire organization. After some investigation, Miss Angel told him that the Saint Heroes Society's activities in the theocracy had been suspended for many years. This news made Luo Ya relieved, but even so, the boy was still very concerned about this sect that believed in the Mother Goddess. After all, the 6 disasters were related to the survival of the human community, and he could not afford to underestimate the enemy. He did not expect to meet them here. After reading the letter, Luo Ya first determined the current time, 612 of the Third Era, which was almost 400 years away from the era Luo Ya lived in. The location was also very clear, near the Scholar's country, Leinster. This era should be the time of the Second War of the Mutants. As for Leinster, it seems that there was a turmoil. The boy muttered to himself as he recalled the background of the era. At the same time, he tried his best to think about the content of the Scholar's country, but he found that there were quite few impressions. As a huge disaster that threatened the entire human world, the main theme of this era was undoubtedly the Second War of the Mutants. Most of the writers of history were used to describe this long and drawn-out war, to record the tenacious and unyielding spirit of mankind, and to write a heroic story that could be both praised and wept. Luo Ya wouldn't be able to finish talking about all these in a day. However, as for the Scholar country, there really wasn't any record of it. In the end, it was still too long ago. 800 years was enough to bury a country like the Sophia dynasty in history. Leinster from 400 years ago was not even worth mentioning compared to the front line that was rolling in the blood of the aliens. Luo Ya only remembered that there was a book that said there was a turmoil caused by the cultists in the Kingdom of Scholars, and this was also confirmed by this letter. The sender of the letter was Bradley, the president of the Leinster branch of the Saint Heroes Guild. The content of the letter was very simple. It was a plea for help. Currently, there was indeed a cult riot in Leinster City, which was probably caused by the deployment of too many human elites to the front line. Unfortunately, the main character of this riot was not the Saint Heroes Society, but the Brotherhood of Redemption. The relationship between cults was probably a blind spot for many people. Laymen often thought that jackals of the same tribe would inevitably collude with each other, but in fact, this was completely wrong. Different cults had different goals. For example, the Saint Heroes Society was a cult that longed for the 6 disasters, to purify the world and lead everyone to return to Mother Goddess. Strictly speaking, its purpose was to destroy human civilization. Luoya didn't know the purpose of the Brotherhood of Redemption, but one thing was certain. They didn't believe in Mother Goddess, so they probably didn't like the six disasters. And even if the Brotherhood of Redemption was also a group of idiots who wanted to destroy the world, they would never cooperate because they did not believe in the same God. They would be considered heathens if they did not believe in the same God. Once the heathens achieved their goal, even if the result was the same, they would still lose. Therefore, although they were all evil, they would never pee in the same pot. And now, the situation in Leinster had proven this point with facts. According to the letter, the Brotherhood of Redemption had almost completely occupied Leinster with the help of a sacred relic. The defenders and the surviving residents of the city had retreated to St. Freya's College and activated the defense mechanism of the city within the city. The Brotherhood of Redemption saw this and temporarily changed their target, killing the cultists in the city who disobeyed their leadership. The Saint Heroes Society was the first to bear the brunt and suffered heavy losses. As an old cult, the Saint Heroes Society also had their own trump card, but it seemed that only the Sacred Envoy could activate it. This was also the reason why they sent an urgent letter to the Sacred Envoy. But unfortunately, the Saint Heroes Society couldn't wait for their Sacred Envoy because after confirmation, Luoya found that the so-called Sacred Envoy was the dead young man. There's no saving him. Goodbye. After reading the entire letter, Luoya had a basic understanding of the current situation in Leinster City. He was happy to see this dog-eat-dog situation, but at the same time, a choice appeared in front of him, and that was to enter the city or not. It was obvious that compared to the complicated situation in Leinster City, where all parties were fighting, the wilderness was much safer despite its hardships. Just hide in the woods for half a month, and at the very least, they could keep their lives. That's right. Luoya was actually unwilling to get involved in this mess. After all, he was not in a good state now. This time, the timing of entering the historical fragment was too bad. Unlike the previous two times when he was full of energy, Luoya had just defeated Matthew, who sacrificed himself. In the process, he overdrew his vitality and used the touch of frozen earth. Although the extent was very light compared to the past, the side effects were still there. After entering the city, no matter if he encountered the Saint Heroes Society or the Brotherhood of Redemption, it was basically unavoidable to fight. The only one he could rely on was the Academy, which was the weakest. To get there, he would have to pass through a large area occupied by the enemy. And most importantly, even if he arrived, Luoya, who had no identity in this era, should not be able to enter. In the war against the cult, it was common sense to never let a traitor sneak in even if there was a shortage of people. Not entering the city was undoubtedly the safest situation, but on the other hand, there were also many problems. First of all, naturally, there was the system's evaluation and harvest. Although the historical fragment was unusually dangerous, it would bring a huge leap in Luoya's strength every time. This was without a doubt. Not entering the city was equivalent to giving up this precious opportunity. On the other hand, it was the 612th year of the Second Era. At this time, the Dusk Sage Society should not have disappeared yet. The scholar should be in the academy, and there was nothing better than seeing the scholar in person to solve the mystery. Chapter 292. Leinster City was done for. This was the most intuitive thought of the Leinster City branch president and bishop of the Saint Heroes Society, Bradley Dennis, a gray-haired, middle-aged man. It had been nearly a week since the Brotherhood of Redemption started their rebellion. In this week, Bradley's mood had almost gone through a roller coaster ride, and he had not recovered from it until now. After the war with the aliens began, the elite forces of Leinster City were constantly drawn away. With the reduction of teachers, the number of students from various countries plummeted, and the Holy See's personnel were constantly transferred to the front line. The darkness in the city began to stir. Various cults had been secretly expanding their influence and fighting with each other. This situation had been going on for 10 years. During these 10 years, it was not that the upper echelons of the human race did not know about their little tricks, but they had deliberately ignored them. The reason was very simple. They no longer had the heart and power to control them. In the end, In this critical moment of human survival at the front line, the cults that used to be a big problem in the past had become a minor problem. Situations like the one in Leinster City were everywhere in the human world. Troubled times were the best seedbed for the cults to bewitch people. There was nothing more blind than the frightened masses. They were like ignorant lambs being driven around. But what Bradley did not expect was that in this unprecedentedly comfortable environment, when everyone could eat and sleep well, and when their forces were expanding, someone would actually flip the table. The Brotherhood of Redemption was an ancient organization inherited from the World Salvation Society of the Second Era. It had been rooted in the country of scholars for hundreds of years. Although it was not as strong as the Saint Heroes Society, it was still a big tree with deep roots. In the past 10 years, it had developed rapidly and had many conflicts with the Saint Heroes Society. But Bradley never thought that they would dare to start a civil war. This could be said to have broken everyone's common bottom line. The main reason why the higher-ups of the human race turned a blind eye to them was that the cultists were only messing around under the table and would not really rebel. After all, the cultists were not fools, and the mutants were not religious. If they let them in, everyone would be doomed. The Saint Heroes Society believed that the Mother Goddess would lead the civilization to the end, and that all humans would return to the embrace of the Mother Goddess. However, this end must be brought by the Mother Goddess's messengers, and not those dirty and ugly aliens. In fact, the higher-ups of the Saint Heroes Society had indeed issued an order to stop the Brotherhood of Redemption. Others might not know what was going on with the Saint, and might even be waiting anxiously, but he knew very well. Saint? The Brotherhood of Redemption had already killed him. Now, there was a 99% chance that he was their spy. At the torchlit city gate, Bradley saw the black-haired boy talking to the believers from a distance. Seeing this situation, the skinny middle-aged man waved his hand and ordered loudly, "He's a fake. Catch him for me." The white-robed believers behind him rushed out from both sides, and the scorpion puppet made a strange roar. The believers around Luoya turned pale with fright and hurriedly retreated. For a time, the black-haired boy was surrounded. Not good. It seems that they have some information channels, or the Saint and Bishop Bradley know each other. Luoya thought so in his heart. He could not help but frown slightly. According to the situation in the letter, the Saint directly under the council should not meet with the local believers. In the letter, Bradley did not seem to know the name of the Saint. This was a big reason why Luoya wanted to pretend to be the Saint, but the reality did not develop as he imagined. Chapter 293. At the east city gate of Leinster, countless white-robed men surrounded the young man at the gate with torches in their hands. The night wind was howling, but the air here seemed to be frozen. Bradley's voice echoed in the night, attracting everyone's attention. Everyone was waiting for Luoya's answer, but this question was too difficult for the young man. The name of the director who sent him here. This question touched on Luoya's greatest concern, which was the interpersonal relationships of this era. This was a situation that he could hardly grasp after entering the historical fragment. It was like a sharp sword, stabbing directly at his weak spot. Under the light of the torches, the black-haired young man was silent. Bradley's mouth was curved with a mixture of a smile and killing intent. Just as he was about to give the order, Luoya suddenly spoke. "Bradley, where did you get the courage to ask me to say the director's name in public?" Under the gaze of the believers, the black-haired young man gritted his teeth and questioned sternly, which made the middle-aged man's momentum falter. Bradley looked at Luoya's angry face and was stunned. He realized that he did ask some questions, but he didn't want to change his answer in public. More importantly, if he didn't say it in public, Bradley would have to talk to Luoya privately, which he absolutely couldn't do. Because Bradley was from the puppet school. In the puppet school, when the puppet was activated, the body didn't have much combat power. When the puppet wasn't activated, although the combat power would increase, it was still far weaker than the same level. The other party might be here to assassinate him, so how could Bradley be stupid enough to stay with him? These are all trustworthy believers, you can say it. After thinking for a moment, Bradley said so with a flicker in his eyes. However, what he didn't know was that Luoya had already expected his answer. Devout believers? Hearing this, The black-haired young man's golden eyes lit up, and an angry smile appeared on his face. Before coming here, I also thought that you would be devout believers, but after entering the city, I only felt one kind of emotion, fear. What did you say? Bradley asked angrily, but Roja didn't pay attention to him. He gritted his teeth and glanced sharply at the crowd. Then he asked loudly. In less than a week, 3/4 of the city of Leinster had been occupied. The orders of the council were not carried out at all. Even Prandal, who was sent as reinforcements, had died on the way. When you were running for your lives, did you ever think about the glory of the Mother Goddess? You, Bradley Dennis, cowardly and timidly. Why are you still talking to me about being devout? What is devout? Hundreds of years ago, the young director Deoj Lacey returned to the embrace of God's embrace on the vast sea. His soul will forever follow the great Mother Goddess. But what about you? How are you compared to him? Bishop Bradley? The black-haired young man stared at the middle-aged man in front of him with burning eyes, causing Bradley's expression to change drastically. Director Deoj Lacey, this name was no longer circulated in the Saint Hero Society, but Bradley was absolutely familiar with it, because strictly speaking, he was the early leader of the puppet school in the Saint Hero Society. Legend had it that he reached the Source Level 2 at a young age, but in order to delay the enemy during a mission, he entered the embrace of God's messenger in advance. Although Deoj Lacey's deeds were publicized, after hundreds of years, no one except the younger generation of the puppet school knew about it. For Luoya to mention this name, the only possibility was that he had seen the records of that time at the director's headquarters. Comparing Deoj Lacey to Bradley could be said to be a rather obscure reprimand. Deoj Lacey was already a Source Level 2 at a young age, and his position was high enough to be a director. Bradley, who was so old, had just broken through to the Source Level 2 not long ago and was only a bishop. Deoj Lacey fought tenaciously and returned to the embrace of God's messenger for faith, but Bradley was almost defeated and battered. The two were simply incomparable. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man's face turned red, but he did not dare to speak casually anymore. This was because Luoya's reprimand had vaguely proved his identity and made him panic. Is he really the saint's messenger? Bradley's face turned ugly and his eyes wandered. Luoya did not pursue the matter further. He took a deep breath as if to calm his anger, then looked at the middle-aged man calmly and said, "You asked who asked me to come here. I'll tell you. All the members of the board unanimously agreed to transfer me here from Twin Horn Port. Strictly speaking, I'm a special envoy. It seems that the letter from the board has not arrived yet, so it's normal that you don't know me." Twin Horn Port. Bradley's eyes widened when he heard the familiar name. That was the resting place of God's messenger that only the higher-ups of the Saint Heroes Society knew about. It was a pilgrimage place for the believers of Mother Goddess, and because it was also the place where Deoj Lacey died, Bradley had been there once when he was young and was one of the few bishops who knew about it. Luoya came from Twin Horn Port, so he was almost certain that he was a higher-up directly under the board. With this thought in mind, Deoj Lacey trusted the young man even more. Luoya, who noticed the bishop's reaction when he heard about Twin Horn Port, narrowed his golden pupils and continued to speak. "You don't know me, but you should know this aura. This is the grace given to me by God's messenger." The black-haired young man raised his hand as if he had received God's grace. Chapter 294. The Saint Luoya had become the light in the hearts of all the believers of the Mother Goddess tonight. He was the Redeemer, the grace of the Mother Goddess for her desperate children. He was also the Punisher, the thunder and lightning that judged all blasphemers of the Mother Goddess. In the eastern district of Leinster, the fearless believers began an unbelievable all-out counterattack with red eyes. The front line formed by the black-armored soldiers and black-clothed clergy was destroyed as the battle cries shook the entire city. Beside the black-haired youth, the most elite disciples of the Mother Goddess formed a personal guard, pledging their lives to protect the greatest saint. Bishop Bradley's eyes were red with bloodlust as he stood on top of the giant scorpion puppet, leading the charge. He knew that this was his last chance. "The Mother Goddess is watching me." The passionate fanatics roared and rushed into the crowd to launch a suicide attack. The front line of the Brotherhood of Redemption was almost smashed to pieces. Realizing that something was wrong, the Brotherhood of Redemption hurriedly sent reinforcements, but they still could not stop the burning soldiers. Damn it! What the hell is going on? Are the lackeys of the Mother Goddess crazy? At the headquarters of the Brotherhood of Redemption, Bishop Santos listened to the report of his subordinates. He felt like he was in a dream, and he could not understand the current situation. The Saint Heroes Society was depressed during the day, and they were about to die. At night, their morale did not completely collapse. Instead, it was as if they were injected with chicken blood. How is this possible? What about our Redemption Legion? How did they break through the blockade of the Redemption Legion? I heard that the arrival of the Saint of the Saint Heroes Society attracted the attention of the Mother Goddess here. Bullshit. The Saint has been killed by us long ago. Where did the Saint come from? Santos interrupted his subordinates angrily. After thinking for a while, he decided to see the situation himself. However, as he approached the battlefield, the gloomy middle-aged man's face began to turn ugly. Shouts of killing, full of morale, and earth-shattering shouts came almost continuously from the front. The turbulent flow of magic essence, the screams of the believers, everything told Santos the fierceness of the enemy in front. Quickly stepping on the high platform, the surprised man looked into the distance and saw a black-haired youth walking in the center of the team under the soaring flames. He was covered in moonlight, and his golden eyes were shining like candlelight. A strange spell wave was emitted from his body, and the whispers of the black soldiers and clergy were dissolved under the wave. He was surrounded by Bishop Bradley of the Saint Hero Society and a group of high-level believers in white robes. According to her understanding from last night, the annoying murmurs of these monsters would cause headaches or even madness for ordinary people. However, the effects on Lillian were much weaker. Although Lillian would feel uncomfortable every time she heard the murmurs, her bloodline would react and counteract the terrifying effects as if it was protecting her. She was doing well for the time being, but what about Luoya? Although they were of the same bloodline, Luoya was only level 4 of the source level. His body was not in good condition. Could he resist these monsters? The black-haired young girl beside the overturned holy statue clenched her trembling hands. She felt that if she continued to think like this, her mind would not be able to hold on. Sensing this, the young girl repeatedly took deep breaths. Her brain began to think of a way to find Luoya. After a month of interaction and the blood envelope incident, Lillian had a good understanding of Luoya. Therefore, she could more or less predict his behavior. As a meticulous person, Luoya would not rashly go to the academy now. Neither he nor Lillian could enter under such circumstances. Even if they did, the two of them would definitely be detained and supervised. Losing his freedom in such an inexplicable environment was undoubtedly a bad move. Luoya would not choose that. Therefore, the only choice left was the outer city. This area was currently the most chaotic place in Leinster. According to the information obtained from the cultists last night, 2 cultists were fighting on a large scale. These monsters were the trump cards of one of the cultists. Would Luoya side with the cultists? How could that be? Her beloved brother was kind and righteous, law-abiding. How could he be involved with cultists? Lillian shook her head as she thought. She did not know that Luoya had become the leader of a cult in a single night. Her analysis suggested that Luoya must be defending himself against the monsters with the advantage of his bloodline. Of course, all of this was built on the basis that Luoya wanted to find her sister and reunite with her. Otherwise, the forest outside the city would be the least dangerous choice. At the thought of this, the girl became timid. There was no doubt that the two of them were related by blood. However, it was still unknown whether Luoya would acknowledge her. Considering that Luoya was a noble of the theocracy and his relationship with Ratchet, the disadvantages of acknowledging her as his sister would outweigh the advantages. If he did not want her when the time came, just imagining this situation made Lillian's purple eyes sour. She was worried about her personal gains and losses. The horn sounded again. Another wave of soldiers charged at the black-armored monsters. The girl who was awakened by the sound hurriedly shook her head. She recalled the black-haired youth's expression when they parted and encouraged herself. No. Chapter 299. In the room, Luo Ya's body stiffened as he held the box in his hand. A series of system notifications popped up in his mind. Ding! Detected mutated crown stone. Preparing to reconstruct bloodline. The system notification and the contents revealed allowed Luoya to instantly understand what was in his hand. It was the crown stone? Luoya was so excited that his hands trembled slightly. He was not in a good state. The Goulandair and Paytila could not be contacted. Lillian was missing, and it was hard to tell whether Altacia was good or evil. Luoya really needed power, and what the crown stone represented was self-explanatory. So far, apart from the help of the ancient gods, Luo Ya's greatest combat power was the frozen earth touch, skill brought by the crown stone. It could be said that this was his trump card to overcome all the difficulties. Thinking of this, the teenager carefully opened the box. The dense spell seals immediately came into view. The internal structure of the box was divided into two layers. The first layer was the body of the box, and the lock were engraved with strange words. The second layer was a transparent gem. In the middle of the crystal-clear gem, a cloud of air the size of a fingernail was slowly rolling. Its shape was like a vague human figure. The moment he saw the strange dust-colored cloud of chaotic air, a name popped up in Luo Ya's mind. It was one of the 6 disasters of the mother goddess mentioned by Isha Bela. It was also a terrifying existence in the legends that destroyed many long-lived races, including the Ents. The Wind Summoner. This was the name given to it by the ancient Ents. Cade once mentioned it to Luoya. Legend said that it could only be seen in the hazy moments before death. It was a blurry figure that covered the sky and earth in the sandstorm. It could not be understood, could not be communicated, and always looked down on the world with a faceless face. This was the sacred artifact? Luoya stared at the wind summoner in his hand that was still in the egg form. He finally understood why the Brotherhood of Redemption was afraid. He also sighed at the madness of the Saint Heroes Society's higher-ups. Fortunately, Santos and the others had killed the saint. Otherwise, the whole of Leinster would have been in grave danger in front of the wind summoners and would have been wiped off the map. As expected, a cult was a cult. They might have the same goal as normal people for a while, but their different views would only lead to a greater tragedy in the end. Holding the box containing the egg in his hand, Luoya pondered for a moment and didn't choose to absorb it immediately. Right now, he still needed this thing to deter the other party and balance the situation. Moreover, when he recalled the last time he absorbed the egg of the frozen earth creator, Luoya felt a little guilty. But at the same time, he also made a discovery. The Wind Summoner's egg was a sparkling gem, and it seemed to be an imitation of the Serophia's gem curse. The Frozen Earthmaker's egg was a golden soul seal. Both of the Highland Elves' specialties were methods to restrict the 6 disasters. Was this a coincidence? After pondering for a long time, Luoya shook his head and didn't delve into it. He then signaled Bradley to write a letter to agree to a meeting at noon the next day. After a night of chaotic battle, the Saint Heroes Society's believers were exhausted and needed rest. Moreover, noon was the time when the black-armored monsters were least active, so such an arrangement should be just right. After finalizing the details of the ceasefire negotiations, the black-haired young man asked about the contact with St. Freya's Academy. Luoya didn't come here to be a cult leader. He didn't have the noble character of a comrade who established a country to hide his identity to complete his mission. Being able to leave this den of thieves and enter the academy was something Luoya wished for, and the reply he received was indeed satisfactory. According to Bradley, when the garrison retreated into the academy, some of the wounded fell behind. In order to avoid the monsters, they fled to the Saint Heroes Society's territory. At that time, the Saint Heroes Society was in a difficult situation and naturally didn't have time to care about them. However, the situation was different now, and they could be used as messengers. After receiving the news, Luo Ya's eyes lit up, and he immediately went to meet the remaining soldiers. When the black-haired young man entered, the wounded soldiers were still very alert. However, to their surprise, Luo Ya didn't make any sarcastic remarks, nor did he take them hostage. Instead, he let them all go. In the face of a common threat, different species can work together, let alone us humans. Letting all of you leave is my sincerity. Give this to General Antonio, and tell him that I have something important to discuss with him. After handing one of the symbols of the Saint Heroes Society, Cade Steel Amber, to the leader of the wounded soldiers, Luo Ya let them go. Until the end, the young man didn't reveal the news of the current dean, Pris. The main reason for hiding this matter was that Luo Ya's current identity couldn't be revealed. The difference in status between the two was too big. When the cult leader said not to trust his own respected dean, not to mention General Antonio, even Luo Ya himself felt that it was nonsense. If the wounded soldiers heard it, they might think that he was trying to shake the morale of the army and directly refuse to pass on the message. In that case, wouldn't Luo Ya's efforts be in vain? After thinking about it, Luo Ya realized that it was useless to say anything. He simply didn't want to look for trouble. Chapter 301. Inside the Westminster Mansion, a rather magical scene was unfolding at this time. In front of the crowd, Lillian, who was holding Luo Ya's hand, spoke indifferently and plainly. She didn't even have any murderous intent, but in reality, she was bidding farewell to Her Royal Highness the Empress. In the rumbling sound of the ground shaking, all the doors and windows in the Westminster Mansion were smashed into pieces at the same time. Wood chips and glass debris wrapped the heavily armored knights and rushed into the banquet hall from all directions to surround the enemy. Those were the knights in unusually heavy dark blue armor, holding shields and spears on their backs. They had sharp long swords, neighing horses, and fluttering flags with the pattern of a blue spear. When they rushed into the hall, the crowd panicked and screamed. Luo Ya looked up and stared at the knights. Her pupils couldn't help but shrink. This flag, the Blue Knights of the ancient Austin Empire, the strong force that left a mark in history, suddenly appeared in front of her. This strong impact made Luo Ya couldn't help but widen her eyes. However, everything wasn't over yet. When the people in the banquet hall shouted and the horses neighed, a low horn suddenly sounded, followed by a strange sound. Wah, wah, wah! The strange sound came from outside the window and became louder and louder. The panicked guards ran to the window to check, and then their faces turned ashen. As the sound source got closer and closer, everyone present knew what it was. It was the sound of uniform footsteps. Unknowingly, the entire Westminster Mansion had been surrounded by countless soldiers. Large shields and heavy armor were connected together, reflecting the sunlight. The flags were like a forest, and the horns were incessant. The marching footsteps were like stepping on people's hearts. Under the protection of the knights, Lillian's purple eyes were as cold as ice. She looked at the gloomy Santos as if she was looking at a dead man. Source rank 2 was indeed strong, but it was only one level higher than Lillian. However, the difference in combat power between the two was like heaven and earth. In front of these fearless warriors who had come out of history to defend the great ancient Austin Empire, a level 2 source level fighter like Santos was just a little bit of a challenge. In fact, the leader of the Brotherhood of Redemption did not dare to move because there were nearly 100 level 4 source level Blue Knights in the mansion alone. Although Lillian was alone, she had thousands of troops. This banquet seemed to be surrounded by the Brotherhood of Redemption, but in fact, they were surrounded by Lillian alone. The men and women in the banquet hall didn't know where the troops came from. Some were trembling, some begging for mercy, but the knights didn't respond. Lillian didn't show mercy either. Anyone who bullied her brother was unforgivable to Lillian's sister. Chapter 302. The moment their lips touched, Luo Ya's mind went blank. Logically speaking, playing with fire with words shouldn't have been too much of a provocation. The black-haired young man's greatest wish was to calm Lillian down, but the result was far beyond his expectations. Lillian's kiss was clumsy. It was obvious that she didn't have any experience in kissing him. It was purely an act of excitement. However, when it landed on Luo Ya's lips, a strange feeling suddenly arose in the young man's body. It was his brain overheating and the impulse to get closer. It was obvious that this impulse wasn't unique to him. Lillian was driven by this almost instinctive action and couldn't help but kiss him. The intense kiss lasted for quite a while before Luo Ya finally snapped back to his senses and grabbed the young woman's wrist. Huff, huff, senior sister. Wake up. Luo Ya, calm down, senior sister. We're still in the car. Luo Ya's reminder caused Lillian's purple eyes to regain some clarity. After a momentary daze, Lillian's cheeks immediately turned as red as blood. No, I understand, senior sister. I understand. Calm down. The black-haired young man comforted her while hugging the young woman tightly. Feeling the warm embrace, Lillian, who was leaning on the young man's shoulder, calmed down slightly. In the narrow space, the two of them didn't move at all. Their breathing gradually calmed down. Senior sister, are you feeling better? Yeah, about what happened just now. I'm sorry. I was too excited. It's okay. We've never met blood relatives before. Before Lillian could finish speaking, Luo Ya hurriedly comforted her. Luo Ya naturally wouldn't take advantage of being kissed by Her Highness the Empress for nothing. However, he had to admit that Lillian's kiss was very childish. It felt like a chick pecking at rice. It even felt a little itchy. Wait, if that's the case, don't tell me, senior sister, have you kissed anyone before? Roja thought of a key question and asked softly. Lillian's body stiffened, and after a long silence, she shook her head in embarrassment. I knew it. Is it very uncomfortable? Do you hate it? No, not at all. Faced with Lillian's question, Luo Ya resolutely denied it. He felt the young lady's body and even felt as if he was dreaming. In fact, Luo Ya had this feeling ever since he learned that Lillian was his blood relative, and it was even more intense now. Although Lillian's first kiss was only a light peck, it was already unprecedented intimacy for this ice beauty. If this matter were to spread, it would probably drive countless suitors in the Austin Empire crazy. Although I've seen records of blood relatives having feelings of closeness, senior sister, isn't our effect a little too strong? Perhaps it's because there are differences in the kinship between different bloodlines. Lillian explained as she recalled the almost greedy feeling in her body. Luo Ya nodded in agreement. Indeed, the probability of two Akhat family bloodlines appearing in one generation was too low. It seemed normal for her to be unusually excited, but this was too much. Luo Ya sighed as he thought about this. Other people's bodies were controlled by their thoughts, but Luo Ya and Lillian's bodies were affected by their bloodlines. The two of them couldn't do anything about this situation. It was as if this was fate that they couldn't defy. After a long silence, their breathing calmed down. Luo Ya then recalled an important piece of information. Outsiders would naturally find it hard to tell if it was real or fake. Due to the complete breakdown of the negotiations, the Saint Heroes Association immediately strengthened their defense work after Luo Ya returned. It was almost certain that a fierce battle was inevitable. However, unlike before, Luo Ya did not want to participate in the next fierce battle. After successfully meeting up with Lillian, Luo Ya's biggest goal in the Saint Heroes Assembly was achieved. All that was left was to wait for the Academy to contact him. During this time, Luo Ya also had time to check on his system. When Luo Ya saw the score, he was a little surprised. After all, in his opinion, he did not do anything significant during this period of time. He didn't even kill any monsters. Although he met up with Lillian, it was mostly due to Lillian herself. After meeting up with her, she even helped him out. But this matter shouldn't have increased his score by so much. So, could it be that something else had happened? For example, the pendant that he sent to the Academy. Could it have caused some changes? With this thought in mind, Luo Ya's eyes lit up. He used the score to deduce a piece of good news. But considering the situation, Luo Ya reckoned that the Academy's Sage Society and the others would not act too quickly. After all, they were neither relatives nor friends. In this situation, even if they were members of the Sage Society, they would probably have to consider before taking action. During this period of time, Luoya and Lillian were waiting, but at the same time, it was also time for them to rest. Lillian had been fighting for 2 days and 2 nights in a row, so she naturally needed to rest. Luoya was also frozen last night due to the side effects of the touch of frigid earth. As soon as they saw each other today, he immediately felt exhausted. After arranging everything, Luoya immediately brought Lillian back to their room to rest. Now that the two of them were a couple, it was naturally impossible for them to stay in separate rooms. But even if they could, they didn't want to be apart. The two of them who had just found each other after being separated emotionally had some repercussions. It was even more so when it came to safety. Now that the two of them were spies in the enemy camp, no matter what they did in the future, staying together was the best plan. Lillian was naturally aware of this, but the two of them had a rare argument over where to sleep. I'm the elder sister, so you'll sleep on the bed. I'm the man, so of course you'll sleep on the bed. Both of their reasons were too good, so they refused to give in to each other. But in the end, the result was very harmonious. As they were in the enemy camp, after some discussion, they decided to take turns sleeping. One slept while the other guarded. This way, there wasn't much to argue about. Chapter 305. Looking at the alarm clock on the table, Luoya tidied up his clothes and sighed helplessly. According to the agreement, the two of them would change shifts at midnight. However, the clock had already passed midnight, but there was still no one knocking on the door. Lillian didn't wake him up. The black-haired young man recalled the experience in his dream. Although Altacia was troublesome, it was good that she woke him up on time. Otherwise, Luoya might have slept until the next day. After tidying up his appearance, the young man walked out of the room and saw Her Royal Highness sitting outside elegantly and dutifully guarding the room. Lillian's purple eyes flashed with surprise when she saw Luoya waking up. According to her observation not long ago, Luoya should be sleeping soundly. What's wrong? Why did you suddenly wake up? Because it's time. Senior, why didn't you wake me up? My level is higher than yours. Besides, what's wrong with giving my time to my younger brother? Hearing Lillian's matter-of-fact words, Luoya supported his forehead with his hand and felt helpless. Senior, go to sleep immediately. But, preserve the state of high-level combat strength. This is the foundation of the strategy class. Although it's a little depressing to say this, my combat strength is limited here. There are probably many things that I need Senior's help with. I understand. As if hearing that she was needed, Lillian's mood improved instantly. She obediently went to sleep. After stretching and sitting down, Luoya began to prepare for tonight's battle. That's right. There was another reason why Luoya went to sleep first. According to the movement patterns of the black-armored soldiers and black-clothed clergy, the fierce battle between the two cults would usually take place in the middle of the night. This way, even if there was a battle, Luoya, who was awake, could handle it. Lillian didn't have to worry about it. However, the young man didn't expect that despite all his calculations, he had miscalculated the situation tonight. Not only was the situation urgent, but the front line tonight was calm and peaceful. What's going on? Could it be that Lillian's participation has caused the enemy to be wary and not dare to attack easily? Luoya couldn't understand this calmness and felt slightly uneasy. While he was thinking, he suddenly heard a scream from the room. Luoya! Upon hearing Lillian's call, the young man widened his eyes and rushed into the bedroom in a flash. But to his surprise, there were no enemies in the room. Only Lillian sat up on the bed and panted heavily. Did he have a nightmare? Looking at the girl with purple eyes trembling uneasily, Luoya, who had discovered the truth, was slightly taken aback and immediately blamed himself for his carelessness. Too many things had happened in the past few days, causing him to neglect Lillian's mental state. Before entering the historical fragment, Lillian had been traumatized by the tragic death of her friend. After that, not only did the series of shocking events fail to calm her mind, but she became even more unstable because of Luo Ya's disappearance. It was fine if she could control herself rationally when she was awake, but it was normal for her to have nightmares when she fell asleep. Thinking of this, Luo Ya felt pity for her and hurriedly said, "Senior, calm down. I'm here." Luo Ya. Lillian's body trembled slightly as she looked at the young man who walked to her bedside and softly comforted her. She was stunned for a moment before she opened her arms and hugged him tightly. She greedily inhaled the young man's scent. After a while, the black-haired girl who had replenished her Luo Ya finally calmed down. Seeing this, Luo Ya moved a chair and sat in front of the bed. He held the girl's hand and coaxed Lillian to sleep. "Senior, I'll be right here and not go anywhere. Sleep well." After hearing Luo Ya's words, Lillian, who felt strangely embarrassed, hid half of her face under the blanket. However, she couldn't bear to let go of Luo Ya. After hesitating for a long time, she could only nod silently. But after lying down on the bed, her purple eyes kept peeking at Luo Ya. Chapter 306. Estrella Ald. When the name came into sight, Luo Ya's brain couldn't help but turn blank. Ard? Is it that Ard? Thinking of the Eagle of Shadow during the ancient Austin Empire, the original family of the Akkad family, the black-haired boy was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but feel excited. Luo Ya never thought that in the 600 years of the Third Era, this ancient family that could not be found in records and only existed by word of mouth actually still had members alive. If this was the case, Cade's words made sense. No wonder Scholar was a core member of the Twilight Sage Association. She was completely one of their own. As a member of the Ard family and a scholar of the Twilight Sage Association, Estrid must have more information than Luo Ya could imagine. At the thought of this, the black-haired boy had an impulse to fly over immediately. No, I have to calm down." Seeing the name of the ancestor, Luo Ya was excited for a moment before returning to his senses. Thinking of the situation of the Holy Heroes Association, he frowned and began to think seriously about how to implement this plan. Going to the north side of the academy tomorrow night was not a problem, but Luo Ya, who had the status of a holy envoy, sneaked out like this, which made him a little unwilling. The Brotherhood of Redemption didn't make a move tonight. The only possibility was that they were accumulating strength, and the outbreak was likely to be tomorrow night. If Luo Ya escaped at this juncture, then the Holy Heroes Association, which had lost its support, would be quickly defeated. At that time, the Brotherhood of Redemption would launch a large-scale attack on the city. Thinking so, Luo Ya thought, and the corners of his mouth gradually hooked up. The next morning, when Lillian's hazy consciousness gradually woke up, the first thing she felt was the warmth of her right hand. Yes, it's Luo Ya. He's still here. The girl, who had just woken up, remembered the somewhat embarrassing scene last night and couldn't help but feel a little shy. However, she was a little happy that Luo Ya still stayed by her bed all night. Logically speaking, after Lillian fell asleep last night, there was no need for Luo Ya to hold her hand like this. However, the young man did not let go of her hand as promised. This was something that Lillian did not expect. It almost meant that Lillian was very important to Luo Ya. The warm emotions in her heart filled Lillian with motivation. The moment she opened her eyes, she felt as if the world was glowing. Lillian, who had never experienced something like this before, was at a loss for what to do. At the same time, she was intoxicated. Senior sister, you're awake? Good morning." Good morning." In response to the young man's greeting, Lillian smiled faintly and replied with a good morning. However, she quickly recalled that she had just woken up and couldn't help covering her face. "Senior?" Chapter 307. A meteor fell from Leinster City. A few seconds after the flash was released, everyone reacted to it, be it north or south of the city, inside or outside the academy. It was a bright white meteor that seemed to contain endless radiance, beautiful and holy. However, what it contained was not warmth. but the coldness and despair that led people to death. Senior. Everything happened too quickly. In the next second, when Luoya noticed the shining light, the light had dyed everything nearby white. In the distance, an old man in a black robe looked at the place where the meteor fell, his face emotionless. Plist Maxhill, this was a name that was praised in this era. When people mentioned him, the first thing that came to mind was the image of a wise and gentle old man. The followers of Bologna called him the saint, the scholars hailed him as the wisest chairman in history, and the extraordinary people called him the king of curses. Over the countless years, Prister had received too many honors and shouldered a considerable amount of responsibility. But today, as he looked at the falling light, the old man's face was no longer warm and gentle. Instead, it was cold and solemn. It had been 100 years since he fell into the hands of the Savior. After 100 years of planning, Plist was finally about to achieve his goal, but at this crucial moment, an unexpected person came to Leinster. The Ackett family was a family that could not be carelessly handed down, especially their bloodline awakeners. For these chosen children who bore heavy burdens, anything was possible. This was the conclusion that Plist had given them over the long years. Whether it was the insurmountable gap in levels or the unbreakable iron rules, nothing was absolute before them. Their possibilities were far beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. It had been so since ancient times, and this time was no exception. Plist's slightly dim eyes looked into the distance. Under his attack, the entire area trembled, but the two targets did not turn into ashes. Where the light dissipated, what appeared was a huge skeleton and a giant black serpent that surrounded the two people. At this moment, the skeleton had mostly melted in the light, while the giant black serpent was almost shattered. Still, it had to be said that even without souls, these two curse power constructs had indeed protected their master. In the gradually dissipating form of the ancient god, the black-haired youth spat out blood. However, the pain of his body tearing apart did not diminish his will to fight. Instead, it made his will as cold as ice and unshakable. Frozen earth. Amidst the murmurs, white mist rushed out of the youth's body without holding back and tore at the old man who was holding a staff. At the same time, the deep sound of horns echoed from all directions. A powerful surge of curse power that had never been seen before erupted from Lillian's body. They were also Lillian's trump card. Under the protection of these legendary fortresses, the pursuing white light was indeed blocked outside the city. I didn't expect you to be able to summon such a thing. You're actually a mixed blood of the Ace-Man family. The black-robed old man widened his eyes in surprise. After a while, he shook his head. However, even if it's a legendary stronghold summoned by a level 3 source ranker, it won't be able to stop me. Pleas sighed. In the next moment, he raised his hand for the second time. The impact of the curse power that was comparable to divine punishment was released once again. This time, it was several times more powerful than the first time. Under this attack, the warriors who charged at him were reduced to ashes. The legendary fortresses also collapsed one by one. Lillian, who was retreating rapidly, was as pale as a sheet. However, as she felt the young man who was almost unconscious in her arms, the girl's heart was only filled with the promise she once made. I'll definitely protect you well. The feelings in her heart turned into the desire to protect. The black-haired girl who had made up her mind clenched two of her fingers. As her purple eyes contracted, she suddenly exerted her strength. Crack! Amidst the sound of finger bones breaking, the three fortresses that had collapsed and disappeared under Pleist's attack suddenly burst out with a blinding radiance. The fourth city, Fort Sapadro, and the fifth city, Sequoian, rushed out of the ground one after another. At the same time, 7 blue-robed sorcerers appeared out of thin air beside Lillian. They chanted at the same time. A strong wave of curse power spread out from the city, causing Pleist's expression to darken. So that's how it is. It's not to stop me, but to buy time and opportunity for the transfer curse? Pleius' eyes shone brighter as he spoke. After Luoya, Lillian's performance had completely stunned the King of Curses. 10 cities? That was an absolute defense that no external curse could harm or affect the people inside before it was destroyed. Leaving the first 3 cities aside, it was already a miracle that she could summon the 5th city as a level 3 source ranker. She was calm, decisive, and exceptionally talented. Even when she was heavily injured and in despair, she was still searching for a chance. I didn't expect that there would be 2 outstanding Akkat bloodline users in the same era. The King of Curses sighed. However, in the next moment, a majestic killing intent enveloped in aurora and lightning came towards him. Chapter 309. On the city wall of St. Freya Academy, the young man's figure fell out of thin air amidst the flickering light. Cough. Luoya, who fell to the ground, coughed out a mouthful of blood. After experiencing severe injuries and teleportation, the young man was on the verge of death. But when he thought of Lillian, who sent him here, Luoya couldn't close his eyes and faint. He didn't come here because he had given up hope, but to pursue it. A chilly wind blew at a corner of the city wall. There was no one nearby, but the moment Luoya entered the enchantment, he felt that she was looking at him. Thinking of this, Luoya no longer hesitated. He endured the pain and pulled out his dagger, aimed at his heart, and stabbed it. But before the blade touched his body, a rainbow light suddenly appeared and blocked the blade. "What are you doing?" The angry female voice sounded, just as Luoya expected. The black-haired young man raised his head and looked at his ancestor who he forced out with her death. He knew that he had to persuade her to save Lillian as soon as possible. And the first thing he had to know was the reason why she didn't save Lillian. The location of their battle wasn't far from St. Freya Academy. This distance was nothing in the eyes of a top powerhouse who had lived for hundreds of years. There must be a special reason why she didn't save Lillian. Why didn't you do it? Seeing the young man staring at her like this, Estrid couldn't bear it. She pondered for a moment and said with tears in her eyes, "Child, I'm sorry about what happened to your sister, but due to special reasons, I can only do it once. I can't defeat Pulist outside the city. I only have a chance of winning in the city." "I see." After hearing the woman's explanation, Luoya's voice was unusually calm. The next moment, the black-haired young man reached into his pocket and a sparkling gem appeared in his hand. The moment the gem left the box, the faint sound of the wind blew past their ears like the whisper of death. The chaotic air mass began to flow faster, colliding with the gem and greedily seeking air from the outside world. Estrid widened her eyes, and Luoya stated his condition. "Save her, Pulist. I'll kill him." Upon hearing Luoya's words, Estrid's pupils shrank abruptly, but the young man who was covered in cuts and bruises seemed unusually calm. Plist was indeed powerful, but in this chaotic Leinster, there was something he didn't know about yet that could defeat him, and that was the 6 calamities that the Saint Heroes Guild had prepared to kill him. The 6 calamities was a calamity that devoured everything and annihilated countless civilizations. Even the King of Curses who stood at the pinnacle of mankind could not escape the fate of the wind summoners who slaughtered countless long-lived species.